it's funny when in your raps you stay away from what to a lot of people would consider spirituality. In a way, like the way that somebody would present their Jewish spirituality or kind of Buddhist practice or whatever. You don't talk. In fact, often you sort of you slag the guru model, and you kind of separate yourself from that, and you really have a kind of you've maintained a sort of I don't want to quite characterize it right now, but and yet at points obviously you are motivated by something that in your own language you would call spiritual.
Well,
what comes up around that word?
I guess I believe I'm some form of progressive history, that history is progressive. So then the story of evolution and biology and human culture and all this is assumed to be a story with a happy ending. So in a way, this belief in telos, which is not philosophically sanctioned, or this eschatological vein in my personality is what gives it a spiritual impulse. But it's the idea that time, it's an alchemical idea actually, it's the idea that time will perfect matter. And I think it probably will perfect matter.
What do you think about? Do you think that postmodern spirituality is a sort of legitimate term or project?
You mean to believe or involve yourself in, or
believe? It's not really about belief. I mean that whatever the kind. I mean, there's a lot of people now who are developing relationship with all different kinds of spiritual practice, and they're not really doing it even in the way that people did in the 70s, where there was so much more true believing. It's a different kind of relationship.
It's probably on a short spin, a short cycle, that a lot of empiricists are taking up Dzogchen, and that how long can that go on? So then there'll be a lot of revisionism and rethinking and recasting of all this, which is the very best thing for it.
Yes, it is. So were you ever very interested in meditation or yoga?
When I was in India, and immediately before I went to India, when I was in the Seychelles the first time, I was, because when I was in Mombasa, Kenya, I came upon this place called I can't remember. Anyway, it was a library that was basically having a bargain sale in theosophical literature. So I took about 50 kilos of yogic Arthur Avalon theosophical literature with me to the Seychelles. And that was what I read and worked through when I was out there.
How is it that you relate to mysticism, to mystical experience?
Oh, you mean as a source of valid data about what's going on?
Not even that far. I mean, that's one way of saying, of judging it in one way or another, and it doesn't necessarily be valid data. It's just, I mean, you've been interested. I mean, this library, obviously, mysticism is completely surrounding us.
Well, I guess I would say the more personal the mystical indicator is, probably the more likely I am to take it seriously. In other words, it seems to me, if you extrapolate your mystical insight beyond the personal, you probably enter into the domain of inflation, of some kind of psychological inflation. And
so was Plato inflated?
Was Plato inflated? No, probably not, but he probably gets a pass as some kind of pioneer.
You could just start out by talking about the relationship between technology and shamanism.
Well, you remember Iliad's basic book, which is Shamanism, the Archaic Techniques of Ecstasy. That book was originally written in French, and in French, as I don't have to tell you, the word technique has this dual meaning of both a way to do something and a technology. So, from Iliad's point of view, shamanism was always about using techniques to achieve these, what he called ruptures of plane. And these ruptures of plane were these breakthroughs into these healing spaces. And for him it was always drugs, yoga, or ordeal, or maybe yoga / ordeal. So in a way, pushing on the frontier of language and pushing on the frontier of technique always brought some form of breakthrough. I mean, I suppose the perfect example would be fire, where fire must have been something. We talked about the Smith thing yesterday. But so fire technology, the transformation, the visible transformation of materials through heat, and all of that leads straight into better weapons, stronger building materials, and so forth.
So, I mean, do you see then that even though the West turns away from the worldview of pre-modern the enchanted universe, is that there's still something in that process of technological development which is linked to those older technologies?
Well, the way chips are made and the way solid state objects are assembled often is just a matter of bringing a mix of materials to a certain temperature and a certain proportion of materials, and then standing back and letting the laws of physics rearrange the atoms so that electricity or information or something flows through this in an unexpected way. So I think we're still involved in discovering what can be coaxed from the physical world just by letting physical laws unravel themselves.
And that seems to you connected with the operation of doing that goes farther back than just modern science.
Yeah, at low temperatures it's about psychoactive drugs and brewing and combining biological materials. And then at higher temperatures it becomes about this other thing.